trite, contrived, mediocre, milquetoast, amateurish, infantile, cliché and gonorrhea-ridden peon to conformism. I fucked me. Affront to humanity. War crime. Should literally be tried for war crimes. Resolutely shit. Lacking in imagination. Uninformed reimagining of. Limp-wristed, premature, ill-informed attempt at. Talentless fuckfest. Recidivistic shit peddler. Pedantic, listless, savagely boring. Just one repulsive laugh after another.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Just gonna sit here and thumb through this pile of green cards I'm considering adding to Sacred Geometry. Switching from 1/1 elf tokens to 4/4 beast tokens.
Whoa, what a big move.
Huge news.
Wait, that is a huge change. You've got so many things in that cube that make 1/1 elves, don't you?
I think there's 4
Okay.
cards that make 1/1 elves.
Imperious Perfect.
Dwindon's Elite.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 others?
And the rest.
And others. Clearly they're not that memorable.
Rampaging Baloths?
I'm doing Rampaging Baloths.
Hell yeah.
I'm going to try Herd Baloths. Herd Baloth too? Do you know Herd Baloth?
I do not.
It's 5 mana 4/4. Whenever you put a +1/+1 counter on it, or one or more +1/+1 counters, you make a 4/4.
Oh, yeah.
Make the beast token. Right now, there's not that many ways to enable it in green, so I got to figure out if I got to add more of them, or maybe it can just be a thing that happens sometimes. I don't know. Maybe I should add Dragon Blood to this cube. 3 mana artifact,
that is
3
cool,
and tap, put a +1/+1 counter on something.
That is a cool combo, but Dragon Blood is just so bad.
I don't care. It's about playing clean
so
cards.
Bad. It's very below rate for many things that are happening in that cube.
I think it often overperforms people's expectations.
I think that is also true, because it is instant speed, right?
Yeah. I was playing against Agatha's Soul Cauldron for the first time in the Bun Magic Cube last night or 2 nights ago or whatever.
First time in that particular cube?
Yeah, I'm honestly not sure I've played against Agatha's Soul Cauldron ever, because I tend to avoid cubes that would include Agatha's Soul Cauldron. That's not the reason why, but like if I'm at a cube event, I tend not to play like the most powerful cubes. I tend to play the more weird, fringy ones, and it's the kind of card that takes a weird, fringy concept and makes it look completely silly by just being ridiculous. And I was surprised at, I mean, it was good. It wasn't insane in our matchup, but I was surprised at how much just the threat of a single +1/+1 counter instant speed made blocking so difficult. It was like, oh, what am I supposed to? I can't even. Oh.
Would you say that you hated that experience?
Wow, what a great transition. We haven't even done the
intro.
intro.
You haven't even introed the podcast.
Welcome to Lucky Paper Radio. My name is Andy, and I'm here as always with my co-host Anthony. Also did his homework in homeroom Maddox?
No, I did it on the bus over to school.
I got through basically all of high school, never doing a shred of homework at home, save for maybe writing a paper or two, or like doing a big project.
Not in this metaphor of preparing for the podcast, you mean...
No, I mean literally.
Yeah.
I did all my homework in homeroom, including many times writing entire 5-page papers in like 20 minutes.
Yeah. I wasn't a great at homework. It wasn't my forte.
Did you get good grades in high school?
It was mixed. Like, there were some things I was just like, I'm just good at this. And then some things I was like, I'm bored and this sucks and I'm not going to do the work.
Yeah, it's funny. I guess I never would have known how you performed in high school. And you're obviously brilliant, so I would have expected you to get great grades. But yeah, if you just didn't care, then that would be different.
I was great at chemistry and geometry. Those things, like, people were struggling. And I'm like, can't you rotate the shape in your mind?
That's how I felt in geometry. Like, I literally had a whole year of geometry and whatever grade it was, that was our, like, math focus. And it was like, I already know all this stuff. Like, it was barely like I was learning anything.
It's just intuitive, yeah.
It was like, what do you mean? Of course, yeah, duh, obviously. And then calculus was next year, and I was like, oh, all of a sudden my mental models are failing me, and I have to actually learn stuff, which sucks.
Yeah, I do wish I mean, we went to art school, so I didn't go that deep into learning a lot of things, except for, like, my own independent learning.
Hey, you learned lots of things, just not...
Sure, yeah. But I do... Regret's a strong term. I always wish that I had better grounding in calculus, because I feel like so many of the concepts of calculus are really powerful in helping you understand other things in the world, and not having that mathematical underpinning is a limiting factor. Oh well.
Yeah, maybe.
That's the kind of level of regret. It's kind of an, oh well, and I know I could learn it, but it's so hard for me to learn a thing without having, like, a project or something that is, something I'm making.
I understand, like, the theory of, like, a derivation. That's basically the founding
area
concept
under
of
the curve.
Yeah, basically.
It's just geometry by another name, right?
Pretty much. This is not a podcast about math. Thank God. Can you imagine? There's probably podcasts about math. What the?
Oh, of course there are. Number File.
That's not a
The
podcast.
Rest?
Is it a podcast?
Isn't it a podcast?
It's a video series on YouTube.
I'm pretty sure it's in my podcast app, too.
Really? As a video series, I've watched a lot of Number File videos. I like them there because I think the visual goes a long way. I would never listen to people talk about math. Oh my God, no thank you. Instead, I like to listen to people talk about Cube, and that's what this podcast is about. Unsurprisingly, we had like a backlog of episodes. We recorded the most recent episode people have heard at this point, like almost 3 weeks ago. It's been a while since we recorded that conversation. This was our episode about hate cards in Cube, and there was unsurprisingly a lot of discourse around that episode. You know, whenever we have a definitions episode, there's a mixed response. Some people really like them and think they're some of the most like crunchy, interesting design conversations we have. Other people think that they're frivolous and pointless and we spend too much time talking about definitions and we also get the definitions wrong or whatever.
That is kind of an interesting sort of aspect of that kind of episode in itself, that I think we are trying to be specific about definitions in order to say, like, this is what we're talking about. So, like, ignore it. Like, we're done defining terms. This is just a thing we're talking about. And yet, people often come back with, well, you didn't define the term right. And it's like, well, the point was we're talking about that concept. And
yeah, I also think that, you know, because I tend to, like, preemptively forefront the definition because I'm trying to head off at the pass commenters that would be like, oh, you're saying that, you know, hate cards should often be avoided for, you know, more incremental, you know, sort of more fair options, but I love scavenging ooze in my cube, and I'm like, I don't want people to think we're talking about scavenging ooze, because even if you categorize that as a hate card or whatever, that does not follow the pattern of the definition that we laid out, which is the definition that I wanted to basically offer some design insight on. Anyway, it's fraught. It's having an audience is fraught. You know, I think we got more people responded to the last episode and said, this made me change my thinking about a card in my cube, and therefore I have cut it or I've added some card that I, you know, previously haven't had than any recent episode. And also more people reaching out and saying, like, this one was bad. And it's like, okay, cool, whatever. But I thought it'd be interesting to come at this from the kind of exact opposite perspective. We talked about a sort of rigid definition, my rigid definition of what I considered to be a capital H hate card. And then I went through all of our cube lists and said, here are the cards that fit this definition. And we talked about why we included them and why that list was so small. Because, you know, for a lot of our cubes, there were none. And for a couple of our cubes, there were a handful. And so it's a thing that we tend to, as I defined in our previous episode, avoid a lot of cards that meet that definition. And we talked about why and where we make exceptions. I thought for this episode, we would just kind of come at a similar topic, but work backwards and just talk about the cards we include in our cubes that people hate for whatever reason, and then maybe talk about why people tend to hate those cards.
this is kind of more of just an aesthetic connection, that we're talking about the same word, but not about the same concept at all.
Yeah, pretty much, basically. I do think that hate cards are called that for a reason, and it's because they tend to be very frustrating to play against.
That makes sense.
So
yeah, okay.
If you
There's
go
a little
far
bit of
enough
a
back,
connection.
there is a connection. But yes, to be clear, we are not talking about the same category of cards. We're talking about a completely different category of cards, which are just cards that our drafters whine and groan about. And I think it's interesting as cube designers when a card is whined and groaned about enough that you or I could look at our list and say, there's one people whine and groan about, and yet we still continue to play it. So let's talk about that.
I think is going to still be, at least for me, a fairly small category of cards, because that's not the experience I necessarily want players to have, but there are definitely degrees of that, and cards that I still feel like are fulfilling a purpose, even if they can be somewhat frustrating and elicit some grumbles. So yeah, small list, but definitely still present.
I think this is also a grading on a curve thing. I kind of think no matter what your cube is, there's going to be some cards people are going to complain about. And if you were to cut those, there'd be new cards people would mostly complain about. Now, that's not entirely true. Like my Sacred Geometry cube, I really struggled to find cards I think people groan about because of two things. And we should say, as always, setting expectations has a huge impact on how your players are going to feel about their experience. In that regard, you could set expectations in a way that you will get way less people grumbling about stuff because they have expected what they're walking into. I think Sacred Geometry, I specifically say this is a wide power level band, you're going to have some great cards, some dumpy cards, that's how it's going to go. That kind of prevents people from complaining about the really good cards, because that's an expectation that's set at the beginning.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, because I feel like when I'm looking through my main cube, regular cube, it's had a wider power level band in the past and it's gotten pretty narrow, or it got narrow several years ago and has been fairly static for a while. But there was definitely a time where it was resetting those expectations and cutting the cards that weren't meeting people's expectations. And yet, I can look through this list and still say, okay, well, this is a card that, because of the way it is, can really easily surprise somebody in a way that is unpleasant. I think your point about grading on a curve is relevant because, yeah, there aren't a lot of things that are like, oh, this card is universally hated, everybody gets frustrated by this all the time, but I can look at so many of the cards and be like, yes, I can think of a time that somebody was frustrated by this and really dislike this card.
That's another thing we should talk about up front is like what constitutes a card we're going to consider a groaner. And for me, I think it's one of two things.
Let's not. I thought we weren't defining any terms.
Well, no, not matter of defining, just describing, yes, people have complained about cards one-off. I think for me, it's either if I get a bunch of complaints about something repeatedly of mild to moderate intensity, or one or two complaints about something that is very intense, like a big complaint, like this ruined my whole match or my whole draft night or whatever. Either of those things will cause me to consider a card a groaner or hated by that player. That's kind of what I'm parsing. And also, obviously, we should also note that, like, as the Cube designer, we have such a weird perspective on this. Like, I certainly don't profess to know what all my players think about all the cards in my Cube. A lot of the thoughts they don't bother sharing with me. A lot of the thoughts they share with me, and I processed in some biased way and, like, didn't put it in the right bucket in my head. So, like, this is my completely subjective perspective on how I perceive players to feel about cards in my Cube. And I expect a lot of feedback we might get from this episode is, you said that no one hates this card, but I hate this card. And it's like, great, cool. If you hate a card I include in my Cube I don't mention here, good for you.
Yeah, I mean, that also just speaks to, we have a different play group, and, like, we don't have the universal supercomputer. We have the personal preferences of a lot of people that we play regularly with.
Personal preferences supercomputer.
I'm sure they're working on that.
I'm not going to talk about Take 5. The reason for that is just because this Cube is still very young. I consider any amount of groaning at this point to be a, like, little data point for me to take note of, but nothing has happened enough to be considered a trend. If there is any sort of pattern to the groaners that are emerging in that Cube, it is actually probably just like the cards that are generically strong. Like, I don't think people are really complaining about someone popping off and doing the crazy thing, even though that's the most powerful thing you can do in that Cube. I think when people are complaining, it's like, oh gosh, I just lost a Scroll of Fate because my opponent just made a bunch of tutus, and it didn't feel good to not be able to beat a bunch of tutus, even though they did nothing cool and fun with Scroll of Fate. So I'm not going to profess to have any sort of sense of, like, broadly how people feel about that Cube yet, still gathering data. I think it's more useful to talk about the cubes I know more about. And I have more cubes than you do, so let's start with one of mine, which is the Bun Magic Cube. This is actually probably the cube of mine that has the most cards I can point to and say, like, yeah, people will hate that one, for sure.
I mean, that makes sense to me, because I feel like a lot of your goals for this cube are playing with iconic cards and playing with very efficient cards, and those are goals that are not necessarily about, I'm thinking about coddling the player experience, it's about putting these specific cards in people's hands.
Yeah, and I think it also emphasizes that we talked about, certain patterns of cards, like cards that, kind of shut down a whole strategy or stop you from doing your thing as kind of styles of cards people don't like. And I think the bigger thing that people don't like is when they feel like they just lost to a powerful card. Power level, I think, ultimately is the thing that will cause the most groaning, where it's just like, I felt like nothing in my deck was as good as what my opponent had in their deck, and I didn't see anything in the packs that was that good. Therefore, I feel like I got, like, sort of tricked and cheated by this cube designer because my opponent just got better cards than I did because they happened to be in this color combination or something. That's where I think a lot of these feelings come from. But when combined with some kind of, like, mechanical thing, can definitely be extra frustrating. I'll put these in order sort of like how much I think people complain about them. I think the card people probably complain about the most in Bun Magic is Orcish Bowmasters, which we talked about as a, like, adjacent to hate card because it does punish drawing additional cards each turn, but it didn't meet my strict definition because instead of stopping your opponent from doing that, like a Hull Breacher or something, it just gave you a reward whenever your opponent did that. It also happens to be an insane rate. Like, the rate on that card is crazy. The floor is a 2-mana 1/1 that makes another 1/1 and shoots something. So it's a raise the alarm with a 1 damage to any target at instant speed. Crazy floor on that card. I think those things in combination tend to make it quite frustrating. It is mechanically a card that I really enjoy playing with, and I like casting that card, and I want to put it somewhere, and so that's why it gets the pass. But I understand when people complain about it, and when people do complain about it, I'm like, tough, this is what you signed up for, right? Like, this is the cube with Psychic Frog and with Fable the Mirror Breaker and with, all these iconic powerful cards, and so this, to me, is in dialogue with those and fits here.
One other question about that. Do you think that the fact that it has flash also contributes to people just, like, being, I don't know, maybe that's a little bit too on the nose, but just, like, being surprised by it and it's subverting people's expectation even of just, like, what their next turn looks like?
It's a huge part of the power level of the card, certainly. If it didn't have flash, it would be much less frustrating, I'm sure, because it would be way less good because you would always have a chance to play around it. But I think you're suggesting that like the fact that in response to you doing your thing, I punish it essentially.
Right. I cast Brainstorm and it's like, okay, now my creature is dead and you have a huge creature.
And that particular line is definitely the most devastating one. And I don't think comes up a lot. I have not seen it happen a lot in this cube. Obviously, it requires 2 specific cards to be, interacting in a specific way, which in a singleton cube like that or Baltimore singleton cube like that is kind of unlikely. Yeah, I'm sure it's a big contributor, basically. Yeah, I think that's a huge part of the identity of the card. I think the next one I get the most complaints about is Uro/Flage. I get a lot of Groaners about Uro and Flage, and I think those cards are frustrating for a very different reason. I mean, both power level again. There's 3 of the top 20 most powerful cards in the cube, Orcish Bowmasters and those 2 Titans. Those 2 are especially frustrating because they just keep coming back. You need to have exile removal or grave hate to deal with them, and there is a fair bit of that in the cube, but if you happen to not have any at access to you at the moment, or maybe you ended up in a color combination without any exile and you didn't take the Scrabbling Claws because you didn't know why you needed it, then it could be extra frustrating when you're like, I just don't have an answer for this. This is going to grind me to dust. There, I think it is, again, always power level in the case of Bun Magic Cube, but also repeated play patterns. Like, it just is happening over and over and over again, and I can't stop it, and that is extra frustrating than if it was just, like, a powerful card that ended the game immediately, or did something insanely powerful and then just, like, left play. Like, Time Walker, Ancestral Recall would be better than these cards here, certainly. They'd be less frustrating because they would just happen, and you'd be like, well, that sucks, you had a powerful card, but now the game goes on with me at a big disadvantage as opposed to this thing just repeatedly happening over and over again.
Definitely. I know that repetitive play patterns can be pretty frustrating. I'm not sure I'm super confident that I understand why. Is part of it just that you, like, spend a lot more time losing, and it's like you're slowly like, yep, I'm going to lose from that when you cast it the 3rd time and I can see it coming and I feel like I can't do anything. Yeah, maybe it's that combination of both spending a lot of time losing and also sort of feeling hopeless.
I think it's also like there's a fun texture to Magic where certain threats in your opponent's deck can be answered by certain answers in your deck and vice versa, and there's like this kind of back and forth of your opponent posing a question and you having an answer and then them posing a question and you having an answer, and when you end up in a repetitive play pattern, it's because your opponent had a threat that you don't have an answer for. And so I think you're often looking at answers for other questions where it's like, okay, well, I have a counterspell, but your thing's already in play. Or, I have a counterspell for Uro, but you can escape it again the exact same turn. I don't have a second counterspell. Or, I have 5/5s, but you have a 6/6, right? Like, I think when you're losing to something repetitive, it's often like the frustration of, I have the wrong things in my hand for this moment.
Right,
that is leading that thing to become repetitive.
That makes sense.
So you don't get to, like, answer new questions. Your opponent just keeps asking the same question, and you keep saying, I don't have an answer.
Why won't you listen to me?
Yeah, it's not that fun. I'll note here that Crocs is also in this cube and has been in here for as long as Uro, and I don't think people find this frustrating because it doesn't gain life and it's a little less powerful. Gaining life on both Uro and Flage, I think, is also an additional frustrating factor. If you got your opponent down to a low life total and you're like, I'm close, I just got to top deck another burn spell, or, find another attacker so I can do a chump attack and throw away a couple of attackers to get one last point of damage through, then all of a sudden, a little bit of life gain, especially repeated life gain, which both of them have, means that tons of outs just vanish from your deck and your kind of whole game plan might feel a little obviated. So
totally. And you have a dislike of life gain in general, and I feel like even if you're not sitting down at the table and giving a pre-cube speech and introducing the cube to people and explaining the kind of gameplay, people will pick up on the kind of expectations just from the cards in the cube, that it's like, this is about fast pace, there's like lots of painful lands, life totals are going down, you're like figuring out how to win a race, and then when the little bit of life gain comes up, that can subvert expectations.
Not that little, they're 3 life each.
I mean, little bit in terms of number of cards. It's just not a thing that you're expecting to see. That's and true. So you're put in this place of like, I'm focusing on understanding what the dynamics of this race are about, and suddenly those expectations get subverted.
The last card that I can say with confidence a lot of people tend to hate in this cube is actually one that I think is not that powerful in a like time-traveling supercomputer win percentage sense, and that is Umezawa's Jite. Again, the repetitive play pattern thing. If your opponent has a Jite online and you're a small creature deck, it's actually happened to me on Tuesday. Like, I just lost to a live Jite because I had a Grixis tempo deck, shock of all shocks, that was mostly blue. I was like kind of splashing both black and red, and I happened to get a ton of stack interaction and nowhere near as much board interaction as I wanted or needed. And I definitely just lost to a Resolve Jite, where I was like, well, now I can't keep you off of literally any creature for the rest of the game. Like, I have a lot of counter spells, but you have a creature land, or you have something made like a single token or something. You get hit in with Jite, and now like I can't play my Young Pyromancer, I can't play my Third Path Iconoclast. Maybe I could draw Ledger Shredder and potentially grow it fast enough. Like, there's just not really any outs for my deck at that point. I didn't have Murktide Region, right, which was one of the cards that would like help me in that spot. I just happened to be like the small ball Izzet deck, which can happen in this cube, right? It's the kind of card that can both be repetitive play patterns and also essentially lock you out of the game if your whole strategy relies on small creatures, of which there are a number of decks that do. It is also high commitment. I like including this card here because I think Jite is a card that used to have this very renowned competitive pedigree. In some ways, that has kind of fallen off. I think it's still banned in some formats, which maybe would suggest that it hasn't fallen off. It's just not.
Did they just unban it in Modern?
I literally have no idea.
Okay, great.
Truly no clue. Yeah, I think they did, actually. That actually tracks a little bit. And I'd be surprised if it was doing anything there. Modern metagame analysis, let me know. But 2 mana to cast, 2 mana to equip, and then having to deal some combat damage when your opponent has all those different points of interaction to stop you and basically make you have wasted all that mana. This card has also been a card that has been kind of underperforming here because a lot of times you play it, you go to equip it, your opponent removes your creature. All right, great, fine. I wasted a couple mana of his turn. Next turn, you go to equip it to another creature and they bounce it. And you're like, okay, great. There's a lot of interaction, and so it ends up being the kind of card that you equip it to a creature, you go to move to combat, and they tap all your attackers down with cryptic command and then just kill you, right? Like, that's the kind of thing that happens a lot in this cube. I kind of like keeping it here as like a card that is aspirational. You can still have moments where it's really good, but you really got to work for it, and it actually is not the norm. The norm, I think, is this card kind of underperforms quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask if actually a lot of people hate this card because it subverts expectations in the opposite way, that people think, oh, I have Jite, I have this powerful iconic card, and then it underperforms, and they get frustrated by that experience.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Or maybe, the two at the same time, the fact that it can be just so swingy and like totally dominate a game or do literally nothing.
I want to mention a couple other cards here that are like either fringe or I would say like surprisingly not hated. Like you would look at the list and think, surely this is a card that a lot of people hate, and I actually don't think that's the case here. The cards I'll mention here are Esper Sentinel, Mother of Runes, Thalia Garden of Thraben, Terminus, Balance, Daze, Ragavan, Psychic Frog. These cards are, in many contexts, worthy of this kind of hate, but a lot of these are like small creatures here that you just have answers for. Ragavan, when it was printed, some people were like, this card's going to be too good, it's crazy. And on rate, it is crazy. Like, everything it does, this just makes no sense. It's like red 2/1s for 1 mana used to have multiple downsides, and now this has like multiple crazy upsides. But at the end of the day, as we've talked about in the show before, it's a 2/1. You can remove it with literally any removal spell in the entire cube, and you can block it with most of the creatures in the cube. So if your opponent is killing you with it, that means that you have neither any of the answers nor any of the blockers, or your opponent has also managed to answer all of your answers and blockers, in which case, like, I think it feels kind of earned. And Mother of Runes is in a similar category. Like, you have a window to remove it, or you can use 2 removal spells to remove it. These cards are not, like, unbeatable here because of the density of interaction I provide.
I think Mother of Runes is a really great example here because you do have that one moment. Do you have an answer right now? And chances are, if you don't have an answer right now, it means you have to draw 2 answers. It just puts people in a position to feel like their whole game plan or their whole expectation of what the game was about is subverted. I definitely, maybe not as much in this cube, but in many, many cubes, this is like classic card people love to complain about.
Yeah, and then cards like Terminus and Daze, which like are just conditionally insanely powerful. I think, again, I've set expectations well enough here that like this is going to happen. This is fine. Just because people might look at the list afterwards, there are 2 cards I just added that I think will possibly make this list in the future and not survive in the cube for that reason, and that's Barrowgoyf and Sylvan Safekeeper, and they just have only been in for 1 draft, so I can't possibly say that people do in fact hate them. I can tell you people hate Barrowgoyf in theory, for sure. In practice, still TBD. Do you want to do one of your cubes, or should I do another one of my cubes next?
Well, I think that's actually a good bridge into talking about my Irregular Cube, which I didn't look at as closely, but just scrolling through the list. Yeah, I don't know how valuable it is to like go through every single cube, because I think we're going to hit a lot of just sort of the same kinds of stories about cards that, we'll cover most of our bases, even if we don't talk about every specific card. But my Irregular Cube is a cube where there's sort of a core list of kind of like low power cards, and then a separate module of cards that are generally much higher power, but also generally to some degree are kind of build-arounds, and a small subset of those rare cards, and that rare module gets shuffled into the main cube before the draft. That creates an interesting set of expectations because it is about a huge power level band, and like, here I'm playing a bunch of like grizzly bears and stuff like that. And then
you will
suddenly
see like C minuses in Retail Limited alongside like Parallax Wave or whatever.
Yeah, and then here's Parallax Wave, or you have like a 3-mana Planeswalker, or some uncard that just does something totally crazy. And I think that because it's like very clear when you're drafting, you see pretty big power outliers, that the situation of, oh, I just lost this card because it is like so much more powerful than anything I have, I don't see come up as much. Like, that is a thing that I think expectations get set well for. but there are a bunch of things that definitely do get very frustrating. And I think that like a couple cards that I'm noticing scrolling through are kind of similar in a certain way. Drakehaven is definitely a card that I've gotten complaints about in this cube because it's an enchantment, it's a little bit difficult to remove, and it creates a very repetitive play pattern of you're just going to keep cycling stuff and keep making drakes, and if I don't have my disenchant, I just can't do anything about it. And it's like, this card is so different from Uro, and yet the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm like, oh, this is kind of a similar play pattern, or
yeah.
Maybe not a similar play pattern, but a similar kind of play
emotional experience.
Yeah. So that's definitely a card that I get complaints about, but I think that card is so cool. And this is like one of the, I think quietly, one of like the most beloved cube cards that so many cube designers are like, I love cycling, it's a great mechanic, I want to put it in my cube, it's like so clean, so classic. And then because I want so much cycling, I want a good clean payoff for it, and Drakehaven is it. That just like every cube designer wants to do it. Do you think that's true?
No, I don't think so. And I think you should...
You don't think so? Wow.
Message Anthony if you hate Drakehaven, because there is a big contingency of Drakehaven haters out there too.
Well, that is also what I'm saying.
Parker chief among them. Parker, I think, is maybe the most visible Drakehaven hater out there. And there's a lot of them. And I understand why, but I'm with you in the Drakehaven is cool camp.
It's interesting looking at like that next to Rise from the Tides, where it's like, I don't think people complain about Rise from the Tides as a payoff for what could be a similar deck of just, I'm going to be casting a lot of cantrips, turning through my deck, and then suddenly make a whole bunch of zombies. And that feels like it's just a very different, emotional experience. And I can't help but slide right over from Drakehaven to Sphinx's tutelage. People just really hate mill.
Yeah, a lot of people don't like being milled.
What's up with that? I'm not saying I don't
What's
also
the deal?
I'm not saying that I don't also hate being milled.
Let's just talk about like the level 1 thing. Really new players don't like being milled because they feel like something's being taken from them.
Right. It's like, here's my deck. These are cards I would have drawn and could have used. And it's like, not really. If the card had just said, remove 3 cards from the bottom of your deck, it would be the same thing. Like, it doesn't matter, assuming you're not doing any deck manipulation. But that's definitely true. You feel that experience of, these are cards I would have drawn that are now being taken from me.
A lot more people than would admit it are probably impacted by that emotional experience, whether they are cognizant of that or not. Like, new players will just say it, and then you learn, like, okay, actually, I know logically it doesn't matter. But I think a lot of people still have that emotional experience of, like, you're still taking stuff from me, even though I know that it doesn't matter, you know? And so I think that's part of it. I also think if mill is your win condition specifically, that is a different axis that a lot of decks might not be prepared to fight on. And it might feel bad to be like, I have answers to all kinds of stuff. Like, if you try to attack me with creatures or whatever, I've drafted these answers to it, but I can't beat, Teferi's tutelage or whatever because it's an enchantment and it's going to mill me out.
Right. I mean, that's a good point that it is setting a clock that just doesn't interact with the other stuff you expect. And if you're in a race and it's like, okay, great, you have a flyer that's doing 2 to me every turn, but I have a 3/3 that's doing 3 to you, like, I understand the dynamics of that race. In a certain way, having a Sphinx's tutelage is kind of like having a 2/2 unblockable, that you're just like, I can't really engage with that on the same axis. And it's also like, there's the element of randomness to this card in particular, that if you hit 2 cards of the same color, it repeats the process.
Yeah, that is frustrating for people.
And so sometimes it's just like, you just feel like you have the worst luck and you keep just hitting the same 2 colors, and that can be kind of a frustrating experience.
Yeah, I said I wasn't going to talk about Take 5, and I still won't, but another card that has come up, which you just reminded me of, is I go out of my way to make Goblin Charbelcher supportable there. And I want it to be playable in 2 ways. I want you to be able to draft a Charbelcher, pack 1, pick 1, and then like draft a Charbelcher deck with like no land cards or very few land cards in your deck such that activating is almost guaranteed to kill your opponent. And I also want you to, in many situations, be forced to play like a value Charbelcher where it's like, well, okay, I have 6 MDFCs that are lands, so I only am playing like 10 land cards, and I can like, maybe filter some of it out of my deck with like, ways to fetch them up, like a land tax or something, and then I'm going to like play Charbelcher for value. That second way, I think it was Alex, had a deck that was playing a like value Charbelcher. I think he said he had 6 lands in his deck, and 2 or 3 times over the night, he activated Charbelcher and hit a land on top literally. And then the 4th time he activated Charbelcher, he 20'd his opponent out of nowhere. And that's definitely the kind of thing that will cause people to be like, well, don't like playing a whole game of Magic to, win or lose based on a coin flip,
Right. That is a pretty extreme experience. This cube also does include, like I mentioned, a couple silver-bordered cards. I don't know what we're calling these days. Acorn cards, uncards, cards that are not tournament legal from some of the old unsets. 2 in particular, I think, can be a little bit hated. One is Magical Hacker. This is a small creature that lets you change numbers on cards by 1. So if you have a giant growth that pumps,
I thought this one lets you switch plus and minus symbols.
Oh, sorry, you're so right.
You're thinking of more or less.
I'm thinking of more or less. No, it changes pluses to minus. You're right. So if something says target creature gets -5/-5, you flip them all into +5/+5. It's such a I don't know. I think this card is adorable. It does cute things.
Cute things like break planeswalkers immediately.
It totally breaks planeswalkers. And this is, again, a cube where, like, you're probably not going to have a planeswalker, but you might very occasionally. And if you have a magical hacker, you're
getting to immediately ult it while also making its loyalty enormous is kind of cool.
Yeah. And I think why my brain was mixing this up is a card that this worked really well against for me one time was Ethereal Absolution, where my opponent played this card that's like a game-winning bomb, and suddenly I'm like, oh, but actually I'm going to flip that, and all of my creatures are going to get bigger, and all of your creatures are going to die for this turn. And I thought that was cool. My opponent really hated it, which is justifiable.
The uncards can be really frustrating because they tend to represent mechanical ways in which no other card can even interact. Where it's like, that's not even a thing you're supposed to be able to do. And it also kind of feels like cheating because it's like, that's not even allowed. It wasn't even allowed at tournaments and you're allowing it here.
It can just feel totally out of bounds. Another one is Staying Power, and this just prevents abilities that would normally end.
This card's not a Groaner, it just sucks.
Right. People hate it.
Okay, I see.
I think this card is just so neat. So yeah, you cast a Giant Growth. Instead of getting +3/+3 until end of turn, you get +3/+3 forever. And it was interesting, actually. I included this at one event and asked the tournament organizers, like, can I include this card? Is this okay? And by the way, I did my homework, and here's literally every card it can interact with and ways we can track it, and they let me. And people hated the card because it's like symmetrical. It's so weird. Like, it's not a thing that you think normally to build around, and it's not that good. So it kind of set people up for failure in a way that, I don't know. I still have a lot of affection for this card. I think it, because it is so weird, is appealing to me, but the fact that it can let people down is just a different way that people can really hate cards.
I'm probably definitely one of the people that has complained most about this card, because I remember a specific draft where I pack one, pick one, did, and was like, cool, I'm going to do a thing. And then there was not a thing to do. Like, there was nothing. I was looking the entire draft and just like, it didn't do any of the things.
Yeah.
I think that actually highlights a specific challenge of this cube, which is that there's, again, very visibly, most of the time in packs, you can tell, like, hero cards that are in the base cube that are like kind of forgettable, whatever, curve filler, and hero cards that are like these weird standouts. And you include standouts for basically two reasons. One is they're really powerful and you don't want them to be in the cube all the time because every single draft will be about this powerful card. Or you just really like them and they're bad. And to like not know as a drafter, is this in here because there's actually a ton of support for it and it's really good? Or is it in here because Anthony thinks it's haha funny?
It's in here because where else? Like, we need a cube where you're going to play Staying Power, right?
Well, yeah,
it deserves a cube.
You shouldn't play Staying Power in this cube. So this is a cube where you're supposed to look at Staying Power in the pack and then pass it around the table, and everyone is supposed to agree not to play it.
I still think it's cool. It's cool with prowess, other things.
No, it's not, because it doesn't work. It never does the thing. It's not cool.
Okay, you're just proving my point.
Yeah.
This is great. That's a very easy episode. Similar to that, there are a couple Conspiracies, and Conspiracies, I think, are well known as cards that are often just like busted power outliers, but also people who haven't played with them before don't know it, and this is like an extreme misalignment of expectations when your opponent starts with a Conspiracy, and it's like, oh, you're just always, I don't have this particular one, but the one that just makes you the starting player is insane. And you're used to like thinking about cards in a certain way. It operates on such a different axis of this, like controlling the way this thing outside of the game that makes it so incredibly powerful.
I think that one is actually one of the least frustrating ones, though, weirdly. Here's the thing.
Interesting.
I think Conspiracies are like the perfect storm of frustrating cards because they have every single detail that we've talked about.
Yes.
They are unknown quantities to many players, so expectations are not set properly, as you said. They are experienced every single game, so they are like inherently repetitive because you do not have to draw them. You just get them all the time, constantly.
Repetitive, even like in a much bigger way than you're going to do the same thing, repeatedly every 3 turns as soon as you can recast Uro. It's like every single game.
And they are usually the most powerful cards in any cube in which they're included, which makes them huge power outliers, which means people could just complain because they lost to a more powerful card. It's like the perfect storm. Like, they're crazy.
I mean, and like Hymn of the Wilds, for example, says the first creature spell you cast each turn costs 1 less to cast. You can't cast instant or sorcery spells. Like, this is in a way kind of in similar space as Companions, where it's like, oh, you just get this effect all the time for the drawback of you can't cast instant or sorcery. It's like, it feels like a Companion in that way, but the reward of you just start with a colorless Moxen every single game
that
is
no one
so
can interact
insane,
with.
And people aren't used to making that like reframing of, oh, this is basically just a Mox. And so, yeah, I mean, it's unreasonable here. I know it's unreasonable, but a lot of players might put this in a cube without thinking of it as this is as powerful as a Mox, except it's always in your opening hand, and it actually kind of draws you a card because you're still starting with a 7-card hand.
Significantly more powerful than a Mox.
It's so insane. And yet, I kind of love it. I don't know, but these cards are like so hateable that I think that when we've honestly, I don't even know if they might be kind of like set aside. We've definitely had conversations where it's like, okay, we're seeding in the rares. Does anybody veto the conspiracies this time? Because they can be that hated. I want to jump into what you called the kind of like bunch of replaceable curve filler C tier cards, because there's at least one card that I really hate here, and I don't know why it's in the cube, which is Saltfield Recluse. This is a creature that has tap, target creature gets -2/-0 until end of turn. Why does this cube here? Or why is this card here? I don't know.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting here. It like changes combat in strange ways. You have talked about how you really like onboard tricks and like Seal of Fire, things like that. But I think for many players, the seals can be hateable cards because they just feel like they know what their opponent has. They know they have this repeatable onboard combat trick, for example, with Saltfield Recluse. And it feels like it just like blocks off a lot of their avenues in advance in a way that is different than just running into an instant.
Yeah, I have an interesting relationship with those cards. I do tend to like them more than most players because I really value the hidden information in Magic. The fact that you don't know what's in your opponent's hand is like key to why the game is fun, fundamentally. And for that reason, I think people should be like very circumspect about including a lot of Gitaxian probe style effects, because that knowledge does make the game less fun for basically everybody involved. But in specific contexts, specifically in cubes where I care about comboing off, like my entire deck is built around this specific combo, I would like to know about how many answers my opponent has to my combo so that I can like construct my curve appropriately. I don't have the same feeling necessarily about like Seal of Fire versus Shock. Like those are kind of interchangeable for me, and I play Seal of Fire in the Bun Magic Cube because I like the enchantment for Delirium and, you know, other kinds of things. But I feel pretty strongly about, you know, the difference between like a Disenchant and a Seal of Disenchant. There's two of them. Seal of Primordium and Seal of Cleansing. In cubes where there's a lot of decks that are going to make A-B combos with artifacts and enchantments, I think it's actually much more dynamic there to be like, I don't get instant speed interaction unless I make you aware of it, right? That's specifically in places where I found that like instant speed disenchants are maybe a little pushed. And so it's like, here's a way to like nerf them a little bit, because now your opponent gets to play around it. You have to play it at sorcery speed, but you can still activate it at instant speed. But that's a really detailed response to a thing. It probably doesn't matter that much. Some people hate those cards. I tend to like them a little more than most. But yeah, Saltfield Recluse is just a, if that was an instant, target creature gets -2/-0, it would be just a horrible combat
terrible
trick.
Card.
It just seems dumb that it's good, if it is good.
Sometimes it's good. I mean, that's maybe another thing is like seeing a card that your opponent plays that feels like it's a horrible card and then getting clowned on by it is also a very frustrating experience. Another card that's in the rare module here of this cube is Mind Twist, and I don't think we need to say anything about that. What's your next cube?
Let's parlay the conversation about conspiracies into a discussion of 100 Ornithopters. We did a whole episode about cutting Echoing Boon from 100 Ornithopters, which was a conspiracy, the only conspiracy that Cube included, and one of the few conspiracies that you, as the Cube designer, have absolute control over how good it is, because it only does things with a specific subset of cards, and that is cards that target your own creatures. You can make that conspiracy awful in a Cube just by including none of those cards, or two of those cards or something. For that reason, for a long time, I really liked what that card did. It was kind of the most impactful card on my cube design decisions. And ultimately, I just took it out because it was frustrating for people, because I was unable to thread that needle in a way that satisfied all players, which you're never going to satisfy everybody. So I don't see that as a failure of mine. I just see it as like a, you know, natural consequence of playing a powerful card like that. But more so, it got to the point where it was like so constraining to my design options that I was like, I just don't want to keep not playing Impolite Entrance because I have Echoing Boon, or I don't want to have to cut Maelstrom Pulse because I have Echoing Boon. You know, like those things were a big limiting factor for it. This cube I think is interesting because maybe the cube that I get the most complaints about cards, but people tend to just complain about every single disenchant in the cube and most of the counterspells and most of the duress effects, like the hand hate cards.
And you tell them, simply draft those cards.
Well, the thing is, like, the expectations for this cube are so specific, and what I have never gotten basically any complaints about, ever, is any proactive strategy, even really broken ones, right? Because this cube is about doing something with like fundamentally useless, in air quotes, O2 creatures, and it's like such a weird bit. If your opponent goes off and takes infinite turns with Time Sieve, you're just like, awesome, that's so cool. Like, you did the thing. I think there's so much grace afforded to people doing the thing in this cube because it is ostensibly such a weird environment where like the thing is supposed to be kind of hard to do that I never get complaints about people comboing off, taking infinite turns, going from I have no board presence to you're dead this turn because I played a haste enabler and a bunch of ornithopters and tempest technique and then just attacked for 100. Like, I don't get complaints about any of that, basically ever.
Yeah, I mean, that's also interesting to note is the cards that don't get complaints. And I mean, one other in the previous cube is Phyrexian Obliterator, which is a card that could draw a lot of hate, but people generally, they're like, yeah, I saw that going around in the draft and I definitely could not play it. So like, congratulations for doing the thing and like warping your deck to be able to cast it.
I think there's like a cube-wide accommodation to proactive decks in this cube where everyone's just excited to see their opponents go off. The corollary to that, though, is that whenever somebody's whole deck is stopped by a card, and especially because it is the cube that essentially promises that you get to do some janky thing with 100 Ornithopters, and then all of a sudden people are like, this isn't the 100 Ornithopter cube, it's the Disenchant cube, because a Disenchant was better than my whole 100 Ornithopter strategy. I get complaints about all those cards constantly. That's
really interesting. And another case where even if you're not saying anything out loud, the cube has a very clear prompt that you pick up just looking at the cards. It says, here's a bunch of Ornithopters, how do you build an engine to win? And people aren't thinking about immediately the sort of level 2 of, okay, well, it's just as valuable. Like, they're very focused on solving that first strategy often and not thinking about the second level of, well, I just need to stop my opponent from doing their engine.
Yeah, and I think there's some subset of people that would expect, their expectations would be, given that sort of prompt, that everybody's just doing dueling giant combos and no one's ever interacting. And that could be a way someone could design and build this cube. It is not a way that I would ever design and build this cube because I do love interactive Magic still. And so for me, this bit was about trying to find a way to make the cube still feel about these Ornithopters and feel like you were building these engines, but also include reactive strategies that were able to, play a more controlling role. I love control decks. I love playing control decks. I kind of love playing against them. I much more prefer to be like, I'm scrapping and scraping and trying to get through a wall of removal and counter spells to deal 4 more damage. That play pattern is so much more fun even when I'm on the receiving end than we each have 55 creatures in play and I got to figure out when I'm supposed to attack. That, I hate that kind of Magic. I was never going to make a cube that was we're just going to each do, parallel solitaire of doing our combos and see which one goes off first. That is not what interests me about this prompt or any prompt. It's been a long journey. You can listen to a million podcast episodes and watch a million YouTube videos of me talking about this at length, but I just think it's worth noting here that the cards that get complaints about pretty much universally fall into those 3 categories and almost nothing else, with a single exception that I can think of now that Echoing Boon is cut. Echoing Boon caught a lot of flack also while being a proactive strategy, so that is the other sort of big exception.
I mean, that was also a funny card because it was intended to be part of a proactive strategy, but then often was just powering up, when somebody had a couple blue cantrips that targeted things.
The thing is, it was just great in so many ways. And I wouldn't want that to be a card that always meant that you were playing, Reckless Charge, Berserk, Scale Up, you're dead. I want that to happen sometimes. But I also think it's very cool that Echoing Boon could be used in a control deck basically to make Twisted Image and Repeal more powerful. I thought that was a very cool edge to the card. But the thing is, it was just great all the time. We talked about why people didn't like Echoing Boon. So now that that's cut, if you then cut out all the other disenchants and counterspells and duress effects, with again a sort of special mention to aura shards being an especially complained about disenchant effect. The other card I get complaints about frequently is Bow of Nylea, which is not a disenchant. It just is a ongoing answer to an unaugmented Ornithopter. You can shoot an Ornithopter, deal 2 damage to a flyer each turn for a couple mana, which is good, certainly, but also far from overpowered. But the thing that really gets people mad about this card is that it allows you to shuffle 4 cards from your graveyard back into your library by tapping it and paying some mana as well. That enables a whole deck, and I think it's really the deck that people find to be very frustrating and risible, and they see Bow of Nylea as the main problem. But the reality in this cube is that you can draft a control deck that is just going to deny your opponent's strategy, shut them down, and then recycle its own graveyard to not die to mill and basically mill you out eventually, because you're never going to mill yourself out. You don't have to have a proactive strategy to make that happen. Now, I've worked really hard to make it so that deck is almost certainly motivated to still play Ornithopters, right? Because again, a lot of the card advantage engines, a lot of the disenchant effects, a lot of the removal and interaction is still reliant on Ornithopters. Some people just don't like the fact that those Ornithopters can be used to fuel a non-proactive engine, a reactive engine. And when they lose in that context, they tend to blame Bow of Nylea and make it about the fact that Bow of Nylea feels like a win condition that is not related to Ornithopters because you can just not die to mill. And again, I've talked about this at length a million times. I feel pretty strongly that like you could always die to mill. You could die to mill without Bow of Nylea in your opponent's deck. They could just have less card draw than you, and
they could just play a 60-card deck with all the reactive spells.
Yeah, I am not going to like go so far into this bit that I'm going to like try and stop people from ever dying from mill, because that's like not an Ornithopter-based win condition. I'm not trying to like forego that. And actually, I like that deck. I think it's cool. I think it's actually very difficult to draft, especially now. And I've dialed this in. There were times where it was easier to draft, but like really good players can be successful with that. And I have tried, and I've had some successful drafts. I've had some drafts where I've totally fallen on my face trying to do that strategy. It is not like a hack code to just 3-0ing the cube. It is very difficult to do. And I think that's cool. I really like it. And so that inclusion there is just because I think the frustration comes from the fact that some people's expectations around the cube based on what they've heard about it superficially are just different from what I want it to be. Their expectations, being different is not going to make me change my mind about what I want the cube to be, though it does change how I talk about it and try and set expectations when I can. But this is an example of a cube whose footprint is big enough that like I actually don't have an opportunity to set expectations a lot of times, right? Like this goes to an event, people have watched a video about it. I don't get to say, hey, by the way,
watch out for this one.
There are reactive controlling engines that are also going to use Ornithopters, so think about what you're going to do in that context. Don't draft a deck that loses to a single duress or a single counterspell or a single disenchant, which some inexperienced drafters will do. They'll be like, my whole deck just completely scoops when you remove my one win condition, and it's like, okay, that's not a good deck. You did a bad job. Sorry.
It's hard to hear sometimes. I wonder if it also does have the issue of just being drawn out and like this like slow inevitability of like, you played a Bow of Nylea and I'm going to lose.
It's for sure repeated game actions.
12
for sure.
turns from now slowly and not in a way that feels like you did the bit. It's like, I'm losing because you played this one card is what it might feel like. And maybe the modality can also be frustrating, that like it's not a card that you just say, I'm putting it in my deck for this one reason that's part of my strategy. It's like, it is that, but then also does other modes that sometimes you just lose to the other modes as well, which is potentially frustrating.
That's one thing I really love about it. Is one of my favorite things that happens with Bo somewhat often is a player that does not think about it in this way, does not think of it as like a vaulted, powerful card that like can be this control enabler. Drafts it because you can put 2 +1/+1 counters on Ornithopter every turn with it. And they're like, cool, I have a +1/+1 counters matters deck, and I'm going to make my Ornithopters big. And then they do, and then it's good, and it's like, great, that's awesome. I try to never say I'm never going to cut a card. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm never going to cut Bow of Nylea from under Ornithopters. I'm just giving you all the reasons why.
Clip that.
I really like it still, and am not bothered by the people that don't like it, and actually just see that as further encouragement to continue to refine this cube so that it really feels like when your opponent does pull off that deck, it is still part of the bit and not ignoring it and flying in the face of it.
Can I ask you about 2 other cards that I might have heard some complaints about?
Yes.
How do you feel about Strength Testing Hammer? That's something you added fairly recently. And
I have not heard complaints about this card. It's funny to me that you have.
I mean, maybe not complaints, but remarks that it was surprising and performed in ways that they did not expect after reading the card during the draft.
I mean, it seems pretty obvious how it's going to perform. Every creature has 0 power, so
I have to read this whole card to understand how it's going to perform.
You are always going to pump it by some amount and draw a card. It's great. That was not even close to on my radar as a card people hate. I think people tend to like cock their head a little bit at that one because it's like one of the only uncards I include. Technically, Organ Harvest is an uncard, but it's from an era where like that card could be totally black border, so that doesn't really count to me. It's basically the only uncard that I run.
Which also I think is legal in...
It is black border because the only thing that makes it an uncard is that it has complete randomness with a dice roll built into it, but it does feel different. I think it is the kind of card that like feels totally at home here, and I don't think is risible.
The other card that stands out is Thrumming Stone, only because the way that this card works can enable a skilled player to completely stack their deck in a bizarre, convoluted way where they're like putting batches of 4 cards in an order they want and has to keep track of how big the deck is. I have watched people spend half an hour thrumming stoning their deck to figure out how to win a game.
Yeah, that's actually a good shout out.
And to the fact that like one of the reasons to hate a card is just like the logistics of it.
Yeah, I almost put Sensei's Dividing Top in every single one of my lists. I
was curious about that,
because I include that card in almost every cube I design because I adore it, and some people look at it and think it's like cube design poison and just should never be included. Shout out to Bones. Yeah, Thrumming Stone is an interesting one that, like, to be perfectly honest, if it wasn't for the bit, I probably wouldn't include it. Like, mechanically, it doesn't really do a thing that the cube needs. This is a 5-mana artifact that gives all your spells Ripple 4, and Ripple means that you cast it, and then it triggers on the stack to look at the top 4 cards of your library and cast all cards with the same name, it becomes a very complicated stack because technically the first one you cast is the last thing to ever resolve when you do a Thrumming Stone stack. The important thing about it, as you alluded to, is that the 4 cards you put in the bottom, or the rest of the 4 cards, however many there are, that go on the bottom in an order of your choice, not in a random order. And so if you are savvy and realize that you are very likely to churn through your entire deck with this because of the density of Ornithopters in your deck, you can often put those cards in an order that you basically are going to draw the ones you want when you want them. You can't stack your deck ever. Like, I think it's impossible to like literally put your deck in whatever order you want, but you have some control over at what point you stop rippling. If you know, like, here's the good cards that I want.
And you can also choose not to cast some of them, which gives you a little bit of extra control.
The biggest thing about this is how complicated it is to resolve. Like, it is all one big stack. You ripple, and in response to the first spells, the ripple triggers go off, and then you ripple into other spells, and then those ones go on the stack, and then you have more ripples on top of those, and it gets very, very complicated to figure out what order they resolve it and how everything sort of stacks. I just think this is cool. There's basically no cubes in the world where you can play Thrumming Stone. I mean, there are other ones that break Singleton heavily for other cards, but like, it's such a cool card that there's no other home for, or very few other homes for. It's very rare that a player comes along and is like, I actually want to do this. This is fun to me. And when they do come along, I ask them to please do it expeditiously. And if they can't, I will not let them. And if they can, I'll say, that's awesome. I'm happy for you.
I think it is just sort of a frequency thing, and the fact that this card does have a very obvious sort of level 1 strategy of I cast this 5-mana artifact, and then I get all my Ornithopters and play it once. Like, that's kind of the first thing. And then that second layer of I'm using it as a way to manipulate my deck is only going to appeal to, only going to be obvious to certain players, and I think if it was a thing that every single time we drafted this cube,
pretty rare,
this came
actually,
up.
Because it's actually not that good, too, is the thing.
Right. That would be very frustrating, and I would hate it. The fact that I've seen people have to do that twice means, like, okay, this is still in the territory of a cool novelty.
That is how I feel, and it's just too cool not to include. A couple other cards here that I think could be hated, but I don't really get that many complaints about. Hurkyl's Recall is an incredibly powerful card here that nerfs so many strategies. The thing I find really frustrating about this card, even as the person that included it in the cube, is that it circumvents almost every way that you could possibly have to protect your proactive strategy. Like, if you have a creature that's like a big creature that's got a bunch of stuff on it, and you have 2 spells to give it hexproof or indestructible or whatever, Hurkyl's Recall does not target the creature and does not destroy it. It just bounces all things target player controls. And so you don't have any way to interact with it, basically. It just kind of buys you a whole bunch of time. I think people don't complain about this mostly because it doesn't usually feel like you've lost a whole bunch. It's like, all right, well, I lost a turn. Like, I get to replay everything and kind of try and do it again. I think that's how that one kind of skates by. I fully expected people to complain about the Monarch cards, especially Court of Garenbrig, and I don't hear complaints about those basically ever, surprisingly. I had the white one in there before, and that one got some complaints mostly because of how it interacted with seals and engineered explosives, which was reasonable. The green one and the black one, I don't get complaints about, so that's fine. I have heard the occasional quibble about Kessig Wolf Run, but I think that falls into the category of like,
you gotta have that card. That's important.
Well, but it's just like, all right, look, you died to Kessig Wolf Run pumping a bunch of Ornithopters. Like, that's cool.
And we're just not going to talk about Aura Shards at all?
I already talked about it.
Okay, great.
Talked about it last week. I mentioned it here. People don't like it, but you're dying because Ornithopters are killing you. It's great. We should probably start going a little quicker. We're running out of time here, which is actually okay because I think Sacred Geometry is my cube with the fewest cards I could think of that people have made a complaint about. The biggest one is Archfiend of Ifnir. Again, same patterns here. This is a card that if you put it into play and your opponent does not have a way to interact with it, it can, if enabled, completely shut down a small creature strategy because you just cycle a couple cards and then there's no coming back from that board state. This one has the added sort of rub of this is a cube that does include Reanimate because it's a clean card. Mostly, there's not a ton of ways to like reanimate a big thing early in this cube. Like, there's not a Reanimator deck, but every once in a while, you just have Reanimate and Archfiend of Ifnir in your hand, and you get to cycle it on turn 2, and on turn 3, reanimate it, and hopefully cycle something, and then it's like, not only is this a strategy that I can't beat, but you like kind of comboed off and did it in a like powerful way early in the game that's kind of like out of dialogue with the rest of this cube. I have considered cutting it, even though I adore the card. I love everything about the card. I think it's so cool. I have considered cutting it because it uses -1/-1 counters, and currently there's only 2 cards in that cube that use -1/-1 counters, and every other counter is a +1/+1 counter, and so there's a big argument for just like cleanliness. I could just cut those 2 cards that use -1/-1 counters and make it more simple, and I've considered cutting it because the play patterns can be very polarizing, but I do have a cycling deck in that cube, and it is a sort of not all-in cycling deck. Like, you're kind of cycling for value to get a couple little fringe benefits. You're not like, well, I'm just going to suck my entire deck away now and like make a million Drakes with Drakehaven. Drakehaven is in there, but usually making like 2 to 3 Drakes. Like it's not like you're going crazy with it. That's just one that I have given a pass because of my personal love of the card. And I know you have it in the regular cube as well. I'm not sure if it has similar play patterns there.
Yeah, I was going to say it really doesn't. So we get to say our favorite thing, which is that context matters. And I think there's just way, way fewer ways to discard cards. So it just becomes something that people have to work for. And the body is just really relevant in regular cube.
It's relevant in this cube too, but Sacred Geometry is definitely a more powerful environment than the regular cube. The other card which comes up that I sort of can think about, I've gotten minor complaints about a couple other cards, like Razormane Masticore, pretty repetitive, but people tend not to complain about that because it's just cool. Muldrotha, repetitive. That one I think would be more frustrating if people were able to make it happen more reliably, but it's pretty hard to pull off. It's 6 mana, 3 colors, and you need to enable it. You got to have permanence, really that self-sacrifice so they go to the graveyard so you can use them repeatedly. If you're like waiting for your stuff to actually just die in combat to reuse it, then it's not that good. Some people just hate taking extra turn cards. Like, I see people complain about Temporal Manipulation, which is not even that good there, but it's like they just don't like when people take extra turns. And there you can kind of pull off a Temporal Manipulation double vision thing where you take like a chunk of extra turns. There's no way to take infinite extra turns to my knowledge, or if there is, it's like 5 or 6 cards. It's some really complicated, convoluted
I bet there's
thing.
a way. Is there an Eternal Witness?
There is an Eternal Witness.
Okay, we just need that and something else.
I don't think I have any blink spells, though. I hate blink spells. So you would need like Ghostly Flicker, a way to flicker 2 things, and Eternal Witness. I don't know what you would need, but I don't think there's a way to go infinite. If there is, it's really complicated. No one's ever done it. But there is possible to take 3 or 4 or 5 turns in a row if you double vision your Temporal Manipulation and then Snapcaster Mage your Temporal Manipulation, which I have done. That play pattern tends to be frustrating. People don't like when their turn's taken away from them, but I don't think any one of those cards is really to blame. The only other card I can think of as a card that I maybe find groan-inducing, and I have not heard as many complaints about it as I would expect, is Loxodon Warhammer. +3/+0, trample lifelink on an equipment. That's a huge life swing every single turn, and I'm including it in the cube because it is so crispy clean. It's so simple. It's actually not that many clean equipment that are also remotely compelling. Like, there's a bunch of short swords out there that it's like, all right, I mean, that is clean, but it's just so boring. It inspires nothing in me. So I'm including it because it's a really clean equipment, but that life swing is a repeatable way that the game can completely be turned on its head that I'm on the lookout for. It's on my watch list.
I think, again, it's like having expectations about what the dynamics of the current board state look like, and then Loxodon Warhammer can subvert that so intensely that it can be a little bit frustrating. And even if you have answers to creatures, it sticks around in a way that is, feeling like you're invalidating a bunch of cards in your hand. But I agree, the card's cool.
While we're mentioning the fact that I get complaints about Archfiend of Ifnir in this cube and you don't in the regular cube, something that goes the other direction is I don't get complaints about Mayhem Devil in this cube, and that was a card that was frequently groaned about in the regular cube. I think the biggest differences there are that you include a decent number of cards that make treasure or clue tokens, and
not that many.
I mean, there's some.
I don't think there's any that make treasures. A couple clues.
There's nothing that makes treasures in the regular cube?
I don't think so.
Did you have some of those cards when Mayhem Devil was in the cube? I remember there was this pattern within that cube of Mayhem Devil, like, it felt like it randomly punished a lot of, like, incidental things in that cube. That has not been a play pattern that's come up here. Something I really like about this cube is that the way that you're enabling Mayhem Devil is mostly entirely in your own deck. Like, it's very rare that your opponent's going to do something that randomly is going to get punished by Mayhem Devil. And so instead, it's just a build around for you that can be very powerful. I mean, this cube includes Goblin Bombardment. It includes some, like, powerful sack outlets. But that means that you, like, built a synergistic thing. And then people tend not to be mad about that. They get mad when it's like, you're telling me I can't crack my clue without losing my, like, build around 1 toughness creature. Like, that sucks. So just interesting that, like, these are cubes of different power levels, different contexts, but it's definitely not a linear relationship, right? Like, Mayhem Devil was problematic in your cube, has not been in mine. Archfiend of Ifnir is not problematic in your cube and has been in mine.
Right, that's really interesting how that works out.
Speaking of your cube, the Irregular Cube.
I think there's only 1 or 2 things I'd want to call out here, partly because I think the cube is like, plays in a way that people kind of like get the vibe. It's like we're smashing creatures together. So there aren't a lot of things that are fitting into any of those kind of spaces of like being a huge power layer that's going to be frustrating or having like totally weird rules text. But there are a couple things I would call out. Firstly, just this class of protection spells. So things like Emerge Unscathed and Snakeskin Veil. Are these hated, or do you just hate them, actually, is maybe a question.
I don't think they're hated.
Okay, then we're great there. Another thing that I think falls a little bit just into kind of the logistics category is, for reasons that I think make sense, I have a number of filter lands and bounce lands and tap lands.
I do hate filter lands. Oh,
and
God.
The filter lands, I think they make so much sense here for a lot of reasons, but The logistics of them are very annoying. You can just like draw weird opening hands. You can put yourself in a situation where you really need 1 mana of a certain color, but you have to tap 2 mana, and same with the bounce lands, and then like maybe lose the ability to cast an instant on your opponent's turn. So I think again, it's like there's a little bit of tension, there's pros and cons, and there are definitely things that can be frustrating about those. It's too bad that we can't just have everything all the time.
Yeah, there are logistical things with lands specifically that come up. I don't mind the bounce land thing so much. The more frustrating thing with me with bounce lands is the whole I'm on the draw and my second land drop is a bounce land. I don't have a 1-drop and I have discarded hand size. Like, that is a bummer. I don't love that. I include a bunch of bounce lands in my own cubes, so like that's something I'm perfectly happy with. To me, I think the filter lands are the most frustrating one because all of the sort of heuristics that you have for like how you ought to tap your mana just kind of go right out the window. Because I mean, the basic heuristics just to like save time when you're tapping your mana are like use sources that can tap for the fewest colors earlier. Like if I'm deciding how to like pay for this colorless mana cost, a generic mana cost, I'm just going to use a land that taps for like, you know, the least colors because I might draw something or have something else in my hand that has with these other colors of mana.
That's such an important heuristic that I completely take for granted, is like all the heuristics around how do I tap my mana.
And yeah, and the filter lands tend to just like throw those right out, and then you end up in a situation where you're like, just have 2 lands left and one's a filter land, and you like kept the wrong color, and you're like, well, now I can't, like, I'm looking at this as a dual land, and now it's like literally not. It doesn't produce either colors of these mana anymore. And I know, I can hear people already being like, just think about it, it's so easy. I know if I thought about it, I could solve the problem.
But I don't want to think about it.
It is not an inscrutable puzzle that my brain can't comprehend. It is just a thing I do not want to have to think about when I'm also trying to figure out how to sequence my spells, where to use my removal, how to attack, how to block. Those ones are like the peak frustration for me. I find thriving lands and lands that have like counters on them to also be very annoying. The worst ones, honestly, are the ones that you choose another color, but they have no technical indicator on them, which...
Oh my god,
we experienced the peak of this because for a long time, at some period, Daniel had like 5 or 10 copies of each of them in the Reading Rainbow Cube. And after like 1 or 2 drafts, we were like, Daniel, you simply cannot. Like, it is hell on earth to be like, your opening hand contains 3 of these lands that tap for blue and 1 other color of your choice, and you have to like indicate it somehow. It's so annoying.
I mean, in there in particular, it was challenging because if I put a couple of those in the regular cube, most likely you'd be playing a 2-color deck and you'd be like, yeah, I have this green land, I named red.
Totally.
Like, there's not a lot of ambiguity here. Or maybe I name my splash color and I set it aside, but there's like more narrative to it. It's like, why am I playing this land this way? In the Reading Rainbow, it's like, I want all the colors all the time and I need to make sure I have the right sources, and it really was
It's annoying to figure out which other colors to name, and then, yeah. Exactly.
I would call out one other specific card because I think it's an interesting combination of a lot of the factors that we've already talked about, which is Prepare to Fight. This is
a Groaner.
Combat trick and then an Aftermath fight spell. And I think it has like all of the hallmarks of these challenging things it's extremely swingy, can be extremely powerful, can gain you a bunch of life and gain you a ton of card advantage. It is...
Not a ton of card advantage. Let's not get too crazy with it.
A ton of card advantage.
It can be a 1-for-1. Wow.
I mean, if you... Okay, let's not hash it out too much.
Under best circumstances, in combat, you'd make it a like card that saves a creature that was going to die, and then after combat, you still have enough toughness on that creature to use the fight spell to pick off another creature and still not lose the first creature, in which case it's a 2-for-1.
Like... 12 life.
That is the problem. I'm saying ignore the card advantage thing. The thing is the massive swing of life on a card that is just on rate very, very strong here.
It also has the issue of, I think it's unexpected. People aren't familiar with this card, and it's confusing to read during the draft because half of it is sideways, and so people overlook it and then are surprised by it in the draft. And then I think it also has the last component of, it's kind of like an onboard, oh, I know about this fight spell, but then I'm going to forget about it being in the graveyard 2 turns from now, and then I'm going to get got by it. And I love this card. It's going to stay here.
This entire episode is, here's the reasons why people hate this card that are very logical and reasoned and make total sense, but I like it too much, so suck it.
Just enjoy Prepare to Fight. It's a good spell.
As a treat. The last cube here is the Neoclassical Cube, and here again, I think expectations is so important. I actually don't hear many complaints about this cube, despite having, of all the cubes we've talked about, by far the most... I guess you have the Turbo Cube to talk about too. Did you go through the Turbo Cube?
I don't think we should.
Okay.
People hate Void Mirror reasonably, but that's kind of what the cube is about, so people also suffer through it.
Of all the cubes we've talked about, the Neoclassical Cube definitely includes the highest density of cards that you could be totally justified in complaining about, because a lot of these cards follow symmetrical, punishing, old play patterns that Wizards has rightfully decided this is actually not that fun and we should not print cards like this anymore.
Would you tell these complainers that they should just be a little bit more humble?
No, we'll get to humility in a second. So for the most part, actually, upheavals in this cube. I don't hear people complain about upheaval. I think they know that they're signing up for the upheaval cube or the parallax wave cube or the whatever. I think
mind over matter, whatever horrible thing is going to happen to me cube.
People don't complain about combos. Mind over matter is fun. You get to combo off and just win. It's cool. There are still a couple cards here. Again, it's all relative, right? Even with these expectations, some cards still do frustrate people. Humility is number one with a bullet. I think it's not particularly close. 4-mana enchantment, all creatures are 1/1 and lose all abilities. It just means that if you don't have an answer to an enchantment, your entire deck sucks now. Almost all the time. You're like, all right, great. You're playing, a mobilization, so you get to make a 1/1 for 3 mana, and I'll just, I guess, pay 5 mana for an abilityless 1/1 because I have a deranged hermit in my hand. So that's what I get to do. It feels really bad. And it's also, I think, unlike maybe a card like Upheaval or, Tinker or, Mana Drain, it's unlike those cards. It is not like an iconic card people always expect to see in a powerful vintage cube. It's like a card that is excluded from a lot of those cubes, I think probably for vibes reasons, but I choose not to exclude because I really like the control deck it enables. So yeah, there's not much to say about that one. It's understandably a groaner, and maybe I should work on setting expectations about it more thoroughly.
It also does have the logistical frustrations as well, that there's just so many weird interactions with it that can be really frustrating to try and suss through.
To be fair, I actually don't think that comes up as much in this cube as maybe Bones would want you to believe.
The Bones propaganda is strong.
I think in a cube with a bunch of modern creatures, it would come up all the time because there's just way more complexity on cards, and it's like, well, wait a minute, how does this work with this or that or whatever, this new mechanic?
I have an equipment. Does it grant the ability to the creature, or does it have the ability itself?
There's no equipment in this cube. The creatures are mechanically all very simple because they're all old school creatures. I actually don't think it comes up very often. The questions I get often are how do mana lands interact with this, which is reasonable. Some people that are new are I still got my ETBs, right? It's no, you don't, unfortunately. That is still an ability on the card. I actually, I don't deal with a lot of people
How does it interact with anger in the graveyard? Anger's still a creature in the graveyard,
course,
right?
Yeah.
Great, okay.
Yeah. That's totally fine. I don't get many problems with that in this cube. I think you would in a cube with different cards alongside humility, but I actually don't have that problem. It still gets some judge calls at events, but I think Bones has been actually not as many as I expect most of the times that this cube is at an event. There's actually 2 other cards here that come to mind. One is kind of a category of cards, which is the Winter Orb Sphere of Resistance static orb category.
That makes sense.
Not hard to see. People don't like when they can't cast their spells, but also, again, this is mechanically what you're signing up for. I don't get as many groans about that, but I do often see people losing, and they're like, yep, it sucks to lose this way, even though I knew it was going to happen. It's yep, that's kind of a thing. The last one, which I think is interesting, and maybe is a little different one we talked about before, that people find very frustrating, is Zurin Orb.
I was thinking about Zurin Orb.
Zurin Orb, I think, is a groaner for a lot of people. 0-mana artifact, sacrifice a land, gain 2 life. It is here because it is a combo card in some circumstances. It is also here because it is a important way for the fast bond decks to be able to not kill themselves, which is not strictly speaking a combo as in I play Zurin Orb and now I go off, but it's I play Zurin Orb and now I can continue playing the game because I don't just die to my own land drops. I think people really don't like this on board you gain huge amounts of life. You've got 8 lands in play. You've gained 16 life from a 0-mana artifact virtually. You haven't done it. It looks like you're at 2, but you're not. You're actually at whatever you need to be to not die. That feeling, I think, is bad for people.
Right, and even if the situation is, if I attack you, you gain 16 life, you don't lose this turn, that might not actually be a good outcome. You might still lose by sacrificing all your lands, but you're still having to factor in that, possibility into your calculus.
Yeah, and I think you as the person that is staring down the Zurin Orb, all you see is the virtual life gain. You don't see the cost of if I sacrifice 2 lands, then I can't double spell anymore. I can't cast a spell if I draw it, which is the invisible stuff that you are not thinking about. Funny one for people to be complaining about because it's so weird.
And it's also maybe in that category of cards that just looks like it does almost nothing. It's it doesn't add to your board presence. Gaining life for a card is generally something that is just terrible, and this actually being kind of a 2-for-1ing yourself to be able to gain life. It just seems like the worst card. So then when you lose to it, it feels really frustrating.
It's so funny because I think to a new player, this card looks broken.
Yeah,
and
it's got a weird arc.
It actually was banned in early Magic. is very good in some senses. By modern sensibilities, I think most players underrate it. Like, I think modern sensibilities tell you that, like, oh, you know, you don't want to play just dedicated life gain cards in your limited deck. Like, you hear that on limited resources or whatever, which is mostly true. But this is a huge amount of life that you can potentially gain, and the cost is a card, certainly, but other than that, no mana. You're not paying any mana for it. I think a card is actually pretty strong, and modern players underrate it, and like new players tend to overrate it. And the real evaluation is like somewhere in between, some nuance of like understanding it. Like, actually, you're both a little bit right. Modern players are like too conditioned by like heuristics. They're not realizing like this one kind of cuts above rate or like goes against the grain. And new players haven't learned the heuristic yet to misinform them. So they're like, this is crazy. And you're like, it's good, but it's actually not crazy.
Do you not get complaints about either Wasteland or Library of Alexandria?
No.
Okay.
I should have talked about Wasteland in the Bun Magic Cube section. I actually don't get complaints about it there, but if I were to complain about a card in Bun Magic, that'd be the number one I would choose. I've said for years that Wasteland does not belong in Bun Magic based on my stated goals at all. 0%. I have a beautiful version with the T.S. Eliot quote on it, and I just want to play it somewhere, so tough. That's what you get.
I can also imagine just players coming to the Neoclassical Cube and seeing somebody play a Library of Alexandria, like, that's what this cube is about. It's
unsleeved
about
on a picnic table.
This incredible sort of like old school vibe, and that outweighs, I think, for anybody playing this cube, the frustrating experience of you just play Library and lose.
Which, to be clear, like, I think Library of Alexandria is a really strong card. I think a lot of modern cube analysis would say that like it's not actually that good and it's been overrated for years.
We should try and
I'm not going to weigh into that.
Evaluate it because it's sticky territory.
I'm not going to weigh into that, more broadly or in Vintage Cube. I think in this cube, it is quite strong. It is very high pick and main deckable all the time. I also think that it is not the situation where your opponent plays it and you just feel like you've lost the game because like the cards in this cube are kind of clunky. Like if you're going to have to figure out a way to like use that card advantage to actually kill your opponent because you can't just draw efficient removal spells for the rest of the game. There's not enough efficient removal spells to draw. So I think it's kind of interesting to see how, if you're going to lose to that turn one Library, how is your opponent going to do it, All right. I hope you enjoyed this complimentary conversation to last week's episode about hate cards in Cube. And this is Cube Cards Hate, or whatever.
Beautiful. I could not have said it better.
Nailed it.
I think that also we have missed so many different kinds of cards that people hate. I'm a little bit curious what other like types of cards people would put on this list, because I think for many people, especially depending on the formats they're playing, they might just put like all counter spells in this category, or all wraths, or like Reanimator is just this like horrible thing.
You just trying hard not to say EDH players hate interaction.
I have never said that once this whole podcast.
Depending on what formats you play, you might put all counterspells or all wraps into the category of cards that you hate. Some sort of bracket of cards that you don't like.
All the extra turn cards. Yeah, so I think that this is very much like limited to our particular play group and particular play experience and particular preferences.
I don't know how much it's limited to our play group. Our play group is, first of all, very vast and broad. And also, we do take our cubes to a lot of events.
Wow,
so
brag.
I mean, it is. We have not only a ton of people, but like people of very different investments in the game, such that I don't think there is like a perspective on our cubes, a like broad perspective that is like not present in our play group. We have like really invested spikes that are like just going to be mad if their cards are worse than their opponents. We have casual people that don't know how mechanics work and are going to get frustrated when a card is confusing to them or behaves in a way they don't expect. We've got
people coming back to the game after not playing for 15 years and are like, neat, Library of Alexandria. Glad that's still here.
Yeah. And also, for what it's worth, well, obviously there are cubes we don't include a ton of cards. You and I hate a lot of cards. We just don't put them in our cubes.
Oh, yeah. All those Spider-Mans. I hate those.
Spoodermans. And on that bombshell, that's the end of this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Went a little long on this one, but I hope you enjoyed the conversation.
There's a lot to hate about Magic the Gathering, apparently. And yet, all those cards were great, and we include them for reasonable reasons.
Yeah, these cards are good, and we're right.
Including Mind Twist.
And no, I'm sorry. I cannot abide that. You lost me. All the music for this show is produced by DJ James Nasty, and the show is edited by Matthew. If you want to support the production of the show and everything else we do at Lucky Paper, you can find us on Patreon, where we also have a whole bonus podcast where Anthony and I talk about anything we want, as long as it has nothing to do with Magic the Gathering. Tune in to hear us talk about pickles, tattoos, and most recently, ramen noodles.
And watch drama.
All kinds of stuff. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast, and this podcast is produced by thinking really hard about Magic cards and speaking to microphones about it. Anthony, thank you for the gift of friendship and for the gift of Cube.
Thank you for giving me a chance to talk about all the cards that other people hate in my cube that I am correct and justified in including in my cubes.
We are correct and justified.